Good morning, bonjour tout le monde. Thank you very much for joining us here today. I'm joined with my caucus members that are here in Ottawa. Today in Parliament, Canada's New Democrats will be requesting an emergency debate on the recent deeply concerning statements and actions by the Trump administration that have grave implications for the sovereignty and security of Canada. On January 3rd, President Trump ordered American forces to disregard international law and core principles of national sovereignty by attacking Venezuela, a United Nations member state. Following this act, President Trump stated that the U.S. would, quote, run the country, end quote, and specifically referenced Venezuela's oil reserves as a prime motivation for this assault. This aggression was followed by President Trump's announcement of the establishment of a Dunro Doctrine, considering the entire Western Hemisphere to be within the sole hegemonic control of the United States. President Trump and senior U.S. administration officials then expressed their intent to seize Greenland, an internationally recognized territory of Denmark, another UN member state, and importantly, NATO member. They justified this aggression by referencing Greenland's Arctic proximity, mineral reserves, and inadequate defense capacity. All of these actions and words have direct application to Canada. Indeed, they were graphically depicted in a photo from the Oval Office itself, superimposing the U.S. flag over a map of Canada. It is clear that Canada faces serious economic, political, and military threats from the Trump administration. These actions and statements constitute a new and troubling U.S. approach to security and constitute non-adherence to international norms. They follow repeated and continuing threats made to Canada since Donald Trump became president. Taken together, these developments have urgent, pressing, and profound implications for Canadian security and sovereignty. Many observers from across the political spectrum have publicly identified Canada's vulnerability as a result. Voices as diverse as Jason Kenney and Bob Ray, former Communications Security Establishment official Artur Wilczynski, academics like Thomas Homer Dixon, and artists like Neil Young. Having just returned from almost a week in Nunavut, I can tell you that we heard repeated reports of alarm from residents of Canada's Arctic, in particular from Grise Fjord, which is closer to Greenland than it is to Ottawa. It's 340 kilometers from Greenland. It's 3,400 kilometers from Ottawa. The Prime Minister recently addressed world leaders outlining the threat posed by the U.S. administration and the wide-ranging consequences that this poses for Canada and the global order. New Democrats believe it is vital that members of Parliament be afforded an opportunity to speak to these important matters which gravely and urgently impact our sovereignty, our security, and our place in the world. Thank you very much, and before I take your questions, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Lori Idlout, our Member of Parliament from Nunavut, for her to say a few words.
Koyan nami siburak tigikan naktagutan Davies okatyak to arugabit suriyunik. First of all, thank you very much to our interim leader, Don Davies, for your wise words and for sharing why we need this emergency debate. specifically because of the threats to the Arctic, but Canada as a whole. The threats to the NATO relationships, I think, are imminent, and we need to make sure that as Canadians that we are showing that we can reassure potentially the most impacted communities in my riding of Nunavut. We did indeed hear from constituents about their concerns. And the reason that this is a national emergency, for reasons pointed out by Don Davies, include as well the Inuit relations that we have across Canada as well as with Greenland, with our proximity to Greenland. We have, because of the historic underinvestments in Nunavut, we've had many Nunavut compelled to leave their territory and seek better housing in places like Edmonton, Winnipeg, Ottawa. We have so many Inuit that live all across Canada that also need to be reassured that their families in Nunavut will be protected, and that Inuit and Nunavut will be engaged in that security, and making sure that if we do get this emergency debate, that we have a good conversation with parliamentarians about what that will look like for all of Canada, so that this is a matter of national interest, I think, and I think I really appreciate our leadership in the NDP to ensure that we do seek this emergency debate.
Thank you, Lori, and now we're open to any questions you may have.
Sure. Well, let's go ahead with questions. Question and a follow-up. We'll start with Hélène Buzetti, des Co-op de l'Information.
Oui, bonjour. Hello, Mr. Davies. I wanted to ask you, sorry to go back a little bit in time, to the statement you made in the name of the NDP when Canada reached an agreement with China. I was a little bit surprised that the NDP was was happy about that agreement, considering the consideration for human rights or forced labor in China. So I just wanted to know a little bit more about the thinking behind that position.
Well, I think first and foremost, the behavior of the Trump administration has made it clear that Canada has to pursue other markets for our goods and services, that the United States is no longer the reliable partner that it once was. In fact, far from that, they are now threatening us in many ways, and very openly talk about doing harm to the Canadian economy. So part of that diversification, I think, is for Canada to reach out to every other country in the world and to try to seek markets for our goods and services. We all know that Canadian farmers were suffering from the tariffs that had been put on us by China, and I thought that it was a limited step forward for Canada to work with the Chinese government to thaw some of those tariffs. And I think the result is going to be good for Canada's forestry workers, good for Canada's fishers, good for Canada's farmers, and potentially good for Canada's consumers as well. So those concerns that you raise are very real. They're very valid. NDP has always believed in a values-based approach to foreign policy, and things like human rights should always be top of mind. But our economic security, I think, is also very important at this point, and I think it was a measured small step forward that is good for the Canadian economy, and frankly sends a message to Donald Trump that Canada has other markets besides the United States.
On a completely different subject, I'd like to ask a question to all four of you, not Ms. McPherson, because you already answered in another context. It's regarding Avi Lewis' comment about the resource employees having a manly culture who puts at risk the sexual security of women in the North, for example, or also criticizing BC government, NDP government, about exploring natural resources. I want to know how you feel about this kind of comments.
This is not an open press conference today. I'll be taking the questions, or Ms. Idlout today. Thanks.
Next up, Emily Haas, Globe and Mail.
Hi, thanks for taking your questions. I think yesterday you had said you were going to talk in caucus about the Budget Implementation Act. Did you decide whether or not you're voting for or against it?
Well, our vote that we did just before we broke for the holidays is an indication of where we sit on the budget. We are opposed to the budget because we believe that it didn't meet the moment and it doesn't provide the kind of concrete actions that Canadians need to the crises that they're facing, whether it's a housing crisis, an affordability crisis, a climate crisis. But at that time, of course, we were very clear to Canadians that we didn't think that then was the right time for an election. I think that rationale still holds right now. So I expect that for the moment, we will be voting consistently with what we did before Christmas on the budget.
Great, thank you. And as well, in terms of endorsements within the leadership race, do any of you plan on making endorsements, and if so, who?
Well, again, as leader, I have taken the position that I will be neutral in the race, as I think is appropriate. And again, I guess, on a different occasion, you're free to ask that to any caucus members. But today we're here to talk about our emergency debate resolution. And I'm here to take the questions today as leader on the priorities on the Hill. So we can leave that question for another time.
Let's go ahead with Stuart Benson from the Hill Times.
Just, I guess, on the sort of the emergency debate, I mean, not to say that it's not an important debate, but Parliament has oh, am I not? Oh, can you hear me? Oh, sorry. Yeah, so just, I mean, just with the speed at which Parliament, or the lack thereof, that Parliament has been getting things done, I mean, just comparing to the last Parliament, I know that maybe recency bias, but there's a lot less collaboration between the NDP and the Liberals. I'm not saying that's your fault, but they're just, it just doesn't seem as much, and also seeing a lot less things get done. I mean, in terms of, I mean, getting this debate through, or just anything else, like, has there been any sort of overtures from the Liberals to your party to see if there could be more sort of collaboration? I know committee, not as many things are getting done because they don't have your support there. Is that something you're still pushing for, trying to get on committee, or just any sort of like greater discussions to try and get things moving again, or is that sort of?
Well, there's a lot packed into that question. I guess what I would say is this is, this Parliament, New Democrats took the position that we are reverting to our historical position as a traditional opposition party. We will support policies that we believe in. We will oppose policies that we don't. Like Jack Layton always, I think, admonished us to do, is we view our job here to make Parliament work for Canadians and to propose positive, constructive policies that'll benefit Canadians. Those are the guiding points that we apply on a daily basis. We want to work constructively with all parties, frankly, on policies that'll help address those crises I mentioned earlier. I would say that the emergency debate today, I think, touches on the most crucial, vital issue on Canadians' minds right now, which is Canada's vulnerability to what is obviously an erratic and increasingly dangerous Trump administration. And, discussing as a Parliament what steps we can take as a country to strengthen Canada's sovereignty, our security, and Canadians' security, I think is of prime importance. And in that respect, I think I speak for my colleagues when we heard from our constituents over the break that people feel right now that Canada is under threat, and they want us as politicians to be as united as possible to come up with positive policies and constructive actions that can strengthen our country. And that's what New Democrats, that's the philosophy and the practice that we'll bring to this session.
And then, sorry, just my last follow-up, and I know this, again, is sort of off topic again, but just we've just had sort of the foreign interference, the Liberals sort of chosen candidate for the registry commissioner. I think public safety is now sort of confirming that name. It seems like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, you guys were left out of the consultations on that. So just, if you have any reaction to the specific candidate, I know it's early, but just, or even just on the fact that I know Chinikwan was very, or the party as a whole, you guys were very, contributed a lot to getting this sort of the inquiry in, and everywhere we've gotten here, but now you're not sort of being consulted just because you don't have enough MPs. So I just, how do you react to that?
Well, actually, that's not true. Yesterday, I was briefed by Minister Andesangari on the proposed new head of the Foreign Agents Registry, but it does give me a chance to highlight the phenomenal work of my colleague Jenny Kwan, who has been a driving force not only for the establishment of the registry, but for the actual implementation of it. And quite honestly, as Ms. Kwan has pointed out on many occasions, and as we all agree, it's been inexcusable, the length of time that is taken for this government to establish this registry after Parliament, I think more than a year ago, decided that we needed such. So it's a positive development. I understand that the proposal is someone from British Columbia who's got a strong record administering elections in British Columbia. And so we think that he's going to be at this point, it looks like an acceptable choice to us. I understand that Ms. Idlout maybe wanted to respond to one of your questions, if that's okay.
Just to add further to what Don's response was to the previous question, I think that we also need to highlight that hopefully the Speaker agrees in this request for the emergency debate that this has to be a non-partisan issue. This is an issue that several issues that all Canadians are seeking reassurances on. And I've spoken with, for example, with Nunavut's new Premier and Cabinet who are in Ottawa this week. We got to see them welcomed here at the House of Commons yesterday. And they are really very much hoping, for example, that when we're talking about Canada's sovereignty, that it needs to be a non-partisan issue, that this is something that we all must seriously consider. It doesn't matter what party you're part of when you're thinking about the security of Canada and how that impacts Canadians and what Canada's foreign policy will be regarding the unstable president that we have in the United States. Thank you.
David, did you still have a question? Yeah, just 1 sec. We'll just get you close to a mic, though, please, so we can... thank you. Perfect. David Baxter from the Canadian Press.
There we go. Get to the mic for our interpreter friends. And yeah, I might have to pop back up there just to adjust the mic. But just before I ask the questions, since we can only ask to the leader right now, MPs Kwan, Idlout, okay to meet outside afterwards for a quick sec? Just for a couple of quick follow-up questions?
Sure.
Perfect. All right. So, yes, on Monday, we heard Government House Leader Steve McKinnon going after the Conservatives, saying that a majority of MPs in the House support what he was calling the Carney Plan in reference to the Budget Implementation Act, and calling on Poilievre and the Conservatives to get out of the way. Their response, by and large, has been, we're elected to oppose, we're going to represent our constituents, we're not getting out of the way. What do you make of the House Leader's comments there in a minority government telling opposition parties to get out of the way, in his words?
Well, I think this has been a recurring problem of the current Liberal government since they were elected in April, which is seemingly a refusal to accept that they're in a minority government. And that the obvious conclusion is that they need to reach out to other parties in order to get anything done. That's the parliament that Canadians sent here. They chose in their wisdom not to give any one party a majority of seats. And I think Canadians expect us to work together as positively as we can. And that's what New Democrats will be doing.
And of course, right now, the premiers are in town meeting. They're going to be meeting with the Prime Minister tomorrow. And we have members of the Liberal caucus saying that expanding resource projects, specifically a pipeline to the West Coast, is part of Canada's overall economic sovereignty. How do you see that argument in the sovereignty context?
Well, a key part of Canada's sovereignty, I think, is respecting the fundamental rights of the First Peoples of this land. And it's a constitutional requirement that we obtain free, prior, and informed consent with also Canada's international commitments to UNDRIP and laws passed in legislatures and parliament in this country. So we believe that Canada's sovereignty is strengthened when we pursue reconciliation and work together respecting the different constitutional jurisdictions and rights, not only of Indigenous nations, but also of the provinces and territories. You know, in the case of the pipeline, we clearly don't have the consent of the province of British Columbia through which any pipeline would flow, and we clearly don't have the consent of the First Nations who would be impacted. They said so very clearly when Prime Minister Carney went and met them in Prince Rupert a few weeks ago. So sovereignty is strengthened when we move together in a united fashion and when rights are respected. And that will be the core underpinning of the New Democrats' policy in this regard.
Are there any other questions in the room? Go ahead.
Hi again. Just have there been any conversations between you and the House Leader's office or any other Liberals around official party status or anything to that effect where you could gain, for example, committee seats or other types of resources?
Well, first of all, recognized party status, that's a dead issue. You know, the Liberals made a decision last June that they were not prepared to do that, so there's been no discussions in that regard. It's simply not going to happen. It's always an ongoing issue about resources. I mean, resources are discussed in this place all the time. So, you know, that's an ongoing issue. The New Democrats have always said, look, we're in a minority parliament. We as a caucus could make the difference in the government falling or not. We have important contributions to make to debate. And so we'll always advocate for the resources that we need to carry out the mandate that 1.2 million Canadians gave us, which is to come here and advocate for the policies that no one else in the House of Commons is raising. You know, we're the only party that's talking really about strengthening our public healthcare system, about good unionized jobs for Canadians, about, you know, truly finally having affordable housing. You know, I just have to say that coming back from Rankin Inlet and talking to people who say that they live in houses of 15 people that have 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, and they've been on housing wait lists for 20 years, strikes you in a way that undercuts the failures of successive Liberal and Conservative governments. So we're here to voice those concerns. And the last thing I'll say is, as you know, Parliament is complex, it moves quickly, and it changes. And to have the resources so that we as a party can discharge our parliamentary functions in a responsible way is something that I think helps Parliament. It's not just good for the New Democrats, it's good for Parliament. And we won't stop advocating for those.
Are there any other questions in the room? And we have no questions online, so this concludes the press conference. Ceci conclut la conférence de presse. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much.